let's get this thing going. Thank you guys for coming this afternoon. I'm Shane Magnuson. I run Upper Columbia Guide Service. I also own Northwest Bait and Scent. And look at that, dog hair. We have black labs. So I like to run these things where, we kind of create a conversation. If you guys have questions, I'm covering something, please stop and ask me. And that way we don't miss anything. It makes it a lot easier and gets us all through it. But we're going to start with trolling, some fish flashes in the lower river to covering 360 Pro Troll short bust stuff and prawn spinners for Willamette and Drano and the wind and some of the upper river stuff. So we got a lot to cover, even trolling some plugs. So on. Starting with right now, trolling fish flashes. Right now, they're starting to let out some water. I know we just had an extension. We don't have many days left, but them running water along with the tides is also going to affect the Willamette and the channel. And those fish are going to be hugging the bottom pretty tight. And when they hug the bottom real tight like that, I know the channel can be a little bit tough because it's snaggy, but I find a lot of the times if I'm ticking bottom quite a bit with my lead and really dragging, I tend to be more effective. Those fish are hugging pretty tight. Now, when you get that tide change where it's coming in and it slackens up and it slows down, those fish are a little bit more willing to come up off the bottom and snap. So if water's running hard and you're trolling, drag bottom pretty hard. Don't be afraid to let it drag unless you're in a snaggy situation like the Multnomah Channel. And then when it slows down a little more off the bottom, they're willing to come up and get it. What I find a lot also in this situation, the bank guys and the anchor guys will start to do real well when they run the water like they're doing now. And the reason they're running water is they're flushing smolts to the ocean. We don't have spring runoff quite yet, but they've released all the smolts out of the hatcheries and they got to get them to the ocean. So they're going to run water, and anchored up in the path or the guys that are plunking, sitting still like you would in an anchor situation, tend to do pretty well in this scenario. So we will talk about some plugs and doing some of that. The setup for your fish flash. Now, I keep it pretty simple. If you guys are familiar with Ken from Coldwater Strong, he makes these 15, 16 inch. This is for trolling. Yep, we're going to go over trolling to start with, and then we'll go over some plunking. Yep. So for trolling, this is a 15 to 16 inch bumper. Now I took that same bumper and ran it as my dropper for my lead, and that's on a slider. That's going to slide up and down my line here and hit at the top of my swivel. You want that slider. This is a VIP line lock. Short Bus also makes a slider that's a line lock like this. This slider locks into the top of your swivel. And what that does is it makes that swivel work and keeps your line from getting all spun up. So I really like those style of sliders. And having that 15 by 15 allows me to take that lead and bounce the bottom real tight and know that this is still, 14 to 18 inches off the bottom, right up in those fish travel lane. You got to remember that that bottom 18 to 20 inches, there's not much current down there the way the current's rolling across the bottom, and that's where those fish are going to be in that heavier current situation. So 15 by 15 bumpers, fish flashes. I like the 8-inch fish flash if you've got some cleaner water. Right now the water is, I would say, a little dirty, not horrible. It was definitely dirtier a couple weeks ago, obviously, when we had all that rain and things. And it's going to get dirtier as the spring goes on and we get some spring runoff. But right now, the 8-inch flashers will work great. But as if water starts to get dirtier, don't be afraid to bump up to a 10-inch fish flash. Something that's going to be a little bit more visible in that dirty water.
You change colors of your flasher with the color with the change of the water.
Do I change color based on change of water? Yes, I do. So when it comes to the visual thing with these fish, as the water changes, or just from morning being dark to a high sun in the middle of the day, what you like to see is first thing in the morning, dark or dirty water, more solid colors or stuff that has the solid tape on it is going to show up in that dirtier water or in darker days, darker mornings. But when you start getting high sun, tape that it has, you know, your scale tape, like your sparkle tape that's on this flasher here, stuff that's going to catch the sunlight, or if the water's a little cleaner, that's going to have more flash once the sun's up. So I will play with the flashers a little bit versus morning to midday or dirty to clean for their visual aspect. Absolutely. Now I just have this rigged on a trolling rod. This is a 10'6" with a line counter, and I run 50-pound braid on these line counters. This is a Daiwa Saltus. The Saltus and Lexus are great reels, but I find the line counters are super important in these trolling aspects because you can really dial in a troll path if you're targeting, say, 20 foot of water and you're running 6 ounces of lead. Once you've gone through it once, you can figure out right where you want to tap bottom. You can take that line counter and put it back there every time and adjust in your troll path. So line counters are super important. 65-pound braid also works well on these. I run 50 just because it has a little less drag to it. I don't have to use quite as much lead or put the line out quite as far with 50-pound. But it's a preference thing, really. 65 handles a little bit more abrasion and in different things, especially if you're fishing, you know, later on in the year out towards buoy 10. So that's my basic troll setup for running a fish flash. And what I like to see is, going back to where I started with the current thing, is we're getting into that time of year, you know, the water's starting to warm up and these fish will get more aggressive as they're moving. And I was talking about how those fish hug the bottom real tight when the current's running hard or the tide's running hard, and they'll start to elevate off the bottom and be more willing to chase stuff when the tide slackens up or the current slackens up. And that's where your 360 flasher is going to come in. Now, in my time of fishing down here, and you don't see a lot of guys running them this early, but they will start soon, is what I find is a lot of times when the tide slackens up and starts coming in and those fish come up off the bottom and are really willing to move, a lot of times the 360 flasher is going to create more bites. And then when it starts to run out and you start to get a lot of current and those fish are real tight, then to switch over to a fish flash style flasher to where you can hug the bottom. This flasher is going to make a big loop and cover more water, and the fish flash is going to hug the bottom real tight. How does that all make sense? Okay, yeah, I kind of covered a lot there. So on the 360 flasher rig, a little bit different. You can rig this with a dropper. I don't have this one set up with a dropper, but if you're going to try to hug bottom tight with this, you can run a dropper off it. But for the most part, you want to keep this flasher a little bit off the bottom so that it's going to maintain its roll. It's going to roll about a 2-foot circle down there. And so you want to not be tapping bottom with this one, want to be up off it a little bit. on this, I play with my bumper length a little bit, but I either like an 18-inch bumper or a 24-inch bumper ahead of this flasher. The 18-inch bumper is going to give you a smaller, shorter snap on the flasher. The 24-inch bumper is going to be a wider, more lazier roll. And both are going to do different actions on your bait, which we'll talk about. Again, your line lock on here for your lead so that everything works, and then your flasher. Now this one is a short bust 360. I fish both those and Pro Trolls. I probably fish Pro Trolls a little bit more throughout the year, but I find with springers, I really mix between the two. The short bust has a more lazy, consistent roll, where the Pro Troll has a more of a snap at the top, and I find some days they want one over the other. Where later in the year, I tend to run a little bit more Pro Trolls. So to kind of give you an idea on those.
What about lead? I've heard some people talk about using a heavier lead that actually helps your flasher work better.
Leads to help your flasher work better. What I find with the leads is that a lot has to do with what action rod you're running. So if you're running a stiffer rod, you're gonna, for running these 360 flatters, if you're running a stiffer rod, you're gonna need to run a heavier lead to load up that rod so that you can get to its backbone, and that backbone is what creates the snap on the flasher. So if you're running an extra heavy rod and you only run an 8-ounce lead on that flasher, you only bend the tip, and the tip doesn't work the flasher. You need the whole rod to work the flasher. Where if you run, say, a medium heavy rod and you run a 16-ounce lead and the rod's all the way loaded up, same thing. You're past that backbone and it's not snapping the flasher. It's about matching that lead with which rod you're using to create that perfect snap on that flasher. And once you kind of get that figured out, you will see more success out of these. So I know with the rods I'm running these 1064 and 1065 edge rods, and I find with the 1064s, I do real well in 10 and 12-ounce leads. In the 1065s, they like the 14 and 16-ounce leads. That seems to hit the right spot in the rod to create the right snap. And it'll be the same across the board if you're using an Akuma rod or something else. So you just got to kind of find that sweet spot for your rod. So yeah, it makes a difference, and you will get more bites once you get that matched up. Not as big of a deal, obviously, on the fish flash. The fish flash doesn't create any action on the lure; it's just an attractor.
Real quick, so will you switch actually out, let's say a month from now when people are fishing the 360s, will you actually go with a fish flash in the morning per se on an outgoing and then switch in the afternoon to a rotator if you have an incoming in one day?
Sure, absolutely. Yeah, I'll switch them out, based on the tide. If we get a really hard outgoing and that current's running really hard, and I know I need to be dragon bottom and need to be down there tight, that fish flash is going to do that more effectively, because it's going to be down there in the dirt right where those fish are, where I can't get this close enough. If this is going to stay above them because it has to make its rotation, and I can't get it down there. And that's why a lot of times they like to come on a bite, during tide changes anyway, but that's why a lot of times you may not see a lot of fish caught during the middle of a hard outgoing, is because if you're running one setup and it's not down in their face, you just don't get them to snap because you don't get there and they're not willing to move until that tide changes. So absolutely. And So some of my friends, what they do is they will run an 18 or 24-inch bumper with their dropper. That way, all they got to do is change out flashers and they don't have to change out bumpers. And they'll run a fish flash just like this. I like to change out my bumpers when I change out my flashers.
So my last question is what makes you decide when you want to go 18 to 24? I know when the water's muddy, you shorten everything up, right?
Sure.
So what's your standard average bumper length
So
that you like?
I really run them both very equally, and again, I find some days they want the lazier roll with the 24, and then some days they want the faster snap with the 18. What you will see is the 18 is a little easier to run tighter to the bottom if you need to, because it's not making quite as big of a rotation. So take that into consideration. But like tomorrow, I'm going to run a trip tomorrow up above the dam in one of my fisheries, and I'm going to run 6 rods, and I'll have 3 rods with 18-inch bumpers and 3 rods with 24. And I let the fish tell me. Now, fortunately, I can run a bunch of rods to figure that out quick, but I really do run them equally. Mm-hmm. Yep. More questions, flashers, bumpers, and kind of why are we changing in and out? I know.
One question.
Yeah.
When you say the tide's running hard, is that are you saying a two, when you're looking at your GPS and the speed, is that a 2 when the tide's running 2 or 1.5 or 3?
When I start getting over 2.5 and going to 3 and 3 plus, the tide's running pretty hard, you know, and my kicker's barely in gear to stay ahead of my gear. And I look down and I'm like, oh, I'm going 3 miles an hour. It's, you know, you're moving pretty fast for those fish. The other part is I have the tide app on my phone, and I can tell what type of tide I'm going to have. If I'm going to have a pretty steep outgoing that might be a negative tide, I know it's going to run hard too, and so I can kind of time that based on, you know, looking at my speed over ground plus where I'm at in the tide based on my tide app. So I'm like, oh, okay, we're starting to pick up, or we're going to pick up. Maybe I should look at changing out how I'm targeting these fish. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Perfect. Okay. So let's look at the anchor setup real quick and a plug setup. And then we'll talk about leaders and lures and bait and all that good stuff. So I talked earlier about our setup for anchor fishing. I don't do a lot of plunking off the bank, and that's a whole another seminar in itself. But for anchor fishing, pretty basic setup. Again, here's that line lock setup again. And the reason being is I don't always run plugs off an anchor. I will run spin fish and the new cut plug off an anchor also. For the most part, I like that same dropper. This is a 15-inch dropper. You may play with this depending on what plug you're running. You may go to a 12-inch dropper or even up as far as a 24-inch dropper depending on the plug. And the reason I say that is a plug like a flatfish or a quick fish style plug is not going to dive real deep, so you don't need a real long dropper. Where plugs like mag lips, like I have in this box, mag lips are going to dig and dive deeper, and so you may need a little longer dropper to keep them up just off the bottom when you're sitting on anchor. So got your dropper on here and then your leader. Now, the rule of thumb on these leaders is if you're going to run a deeper diving plug like a mag lip, you want to run a shorter leader. longer dropper, shorter leader. So this is a 4-foot leader, and I would run an 18 to 24-inch dropper typically to run a maglip. If I'm going to run a shallower, a plug that doesn't dive as deep, like a flatfish or quickfish, then you're going to run a longer leader and a shorter dropper. So a 5-foot leader to a 12 to 15-inch dropper. So that's how you're going to kind of dial in which dropper to which leader length based on which plug you're going to run. I really, if I'm going to anchor in deeper water, stuff that is 20, 25, even 30, I preferably like an M2 flatfish. That's a really good, like, deeper water anchor plug. If I'm going to anchor in shallower water, 20 or less, then I like my maglips. For some reason, in the shallower water, you tend to have a lot of times a little faster current running around a point. And so I'll run a maglip on a dropper on the deep side. And if I'm in 15 or less, then I will just flatline a maglip, because a flatline maglip with good current will dive 15 plus feet, no problem. So that's tend to how I run my plugs. And then the rod's a little different also. I tend to like a shorter rod, something that's 8.5 to 9 feet. This is a 9-footer, and has a little faster tip. That's going to allow that plug to really work. This is a Edge 905, an SAR 905. It allows that plug to really work on that tip. This rod isn't designed to run your flashers. It has too much backbone. It's a little too stiff, a little too fast a tip to run a flasher. This is considered a heavy, and rated 10 to 30 pound, and kind of give you an idea. And I like a 9-foot rod because I can do some different things with it besides just run plugs. I can run a diver and bait. I can back bounce with it. I can do some different things with this rod besides plugs. But there is actual plug rods out there. An actual plug rod is usually about an 8-footer, something short, and it has a really stiff taper with a fast tip, and rated the same way. And that's like a true, like, hot shot plug rod. Yeah. So that's going to be your typical anchor setup. And then on this, you're going to find pinch points, spots where you're on corners, usually where those fish are hugging the bank and they're funneled in tight. Jetties, log jetties that run out, and different things like that, where you can anchor up, get in a hog line, put on your plugs, bounce them back, put them in the rod holder. Now, the thing that works really well on these is putting on a jet diver. I like running a 50-foot jet diver off of this, and I will put one of these cut plugs on it, or a spin fish, and run it on there too. And that sits back there and spins. So that's also very effective on anchor if you don't want to troll. I'm going to put this back away for a few minutes, but any questions on an anchor setup?
What size plug do you run on the quick fish, on the 13, 14, 15?
So I like an M2 flatfish. That would be about the same size as a K14 quick fish. That size range works really well on springers. On the maglips, I really like the 4.5 maglips. This is a 4.5. And then I will go as small as the 3.5 maglip. But this 4.5 does really well on springers also, especially sitting on anchor. And then we wrap this with bait, yes, which I'll go over in a bit.
You have to tune the maglips too?
Not as much. The maglips, for the most part, when you come into tuning a maglip, it depends on how much you wrapped on the belly. If you wrap a lot of bait on the belly of it and it's not real centered, then the maglip may get a little out of tune and you might have to play with it. But they're definitely, over any other plug out there, they're more tuned right out of the box than anything. Yeah. That's why the mag lips don't have a screw eye on the nose, and it's for that reason, is because they're so tuned. But you can, if you're careful, bend that eye a little bit one way or the other if they get out of tune. Mm-hmm. Perfect. How are we doing? Think I can figure out how to switch this? All right, bait. Let's talk some bait, and then we'll start going over what we're going to put all the bait in. So, bait wise, I like herring, I like anchovies, I like tuna. Those are probably my three that I really dive into when I'm trolling downhill. But I also really like prawn spinners. And prawn spinners are going to start taking off here really soon. Usually once the water warms up just a little bit more, the prawn spinners will take off. But for the most part, at the moment, I'm trolling a lot of herring, anchovies, and then things stuffed with tuna, of course. So herring and anchovies, and you can't really see it up there, but I'm brining those in the Northwest Bait and Scent, the Super Herring Brine, and I run some colors, and I kind of follow the same scenario based on my watercolor. If I'm running dirty water or darker mornings, I really like chartreuse. That chartreuse brine stands out really well. If I'm in real clean water or bright in the middle of the day, then I like blue. And so obviously right now with the dirtier water that's coming down, I don't use blue quite as much unless I get into a fishery where it's clean. And then a natural bait is natural. I mean, it's hard to a lot of times beat a natural bait, but I would lean a little more towards chartreuse in real dirty water. And on that, follow directions on the brine. And it's these brines over here that you can barely see, but it's a half a cup of brine to a quart of water, and that will brine a tray of bait. Now, a tray of bait for these springers, I like either red label or green label. And then I brine them overnight in the refrigerator. And like I said, just follow the directions on it. Now, when it comes to running that bait the next morning, I prefer to brine the bait where it's whole and it's not pre-cut or anything. And the reason I do that is all your bait fish, they have their own aminos and their own bite stimulants in them. And if you pre-cut your bait before they put it in the brine, all that stuff leaches out and is not inside the bait anymore. So I like to brine them whole, and then I cut my bait as I fish. If I'm gonna plug cut them or fish them whole, but leave them whole in the brine. Keeps all that natural bite stimulant in the bait. And then we cut and scent as we go. Now I use this same bait if I'm going to be fishing these new cut plugs, which I have in here. I got a nice mess going on, but these cut plugs, you can take and chop up herring or anchovies and put right inside that cut plug. Works great. The other part is tuna. Tuna is, these spring fish love tuna, the fall fish love tuna. It has a more potent smell, and I like to a lot of times chop up a herring or two or an anchovy or two, and then I add a can of tuna to that chopped up bait, and I don't drain it. I like to leave it nice and oily, and then I'll add some scents to that. And my favorite scent in the spring is salmon scent, and I usually mix in a little bit of our sand shrimp or our sardine to go with it to kind of give it a little more smell. But the salmon scent has some anise to it, which is sweet, and they like that in the cold water. And I'll add that to the tuna and the chopped up herring, and then I will mix that together and let it sit overnight, and that's what I'll stuff inside my cut plug or my spin fish or I'll even wrap my plugs with that, which it's kind of a gooey mess, but it'll wrap on the bottom of a plug. It's one of my favorite bait concoctions. Some of that you can't see up there. That's kind of what all that says, but that is my normal bait concoctions. Some bait questions. Let's get me going on bait questions.
How long do you use the bait for? 1 day, 2 days, 3 days?
How long do I use my bait for? You know, if you mix up a good herring batch and it's in the brine up to 3 days, it will go longer, but you'll notice after 3 days they start to get a little slime to them, and I prefer to keep them fresh. A tuna batch, no more than 2 days if you do a tub of tuna. Tuna, once it's out of the can and it has bait in it and it has scent in it, and you're in and out of the cooler using it, after 2 days you'll notice it starts to get a different smell. It may not be rotten or bad, but it does get a different smell. I prefer it personally fresh. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So there's a couple of tip for a hook cell. Are you putting it all in the belly, or you
On the cup
strips, or
so on these cut plugs, anything I can put in them, I stuff in the belly. I don't tip the hooks. That way the hooks stay nice and free behind it, and it allows it to do its action. Mm-hmm.
you stuff them full, or just a little bit, or how much?
I stuff them fairly full, but the key, especially these cut plugs, is to make sure that they stay free on the leader so that they will maintain their spin. If you stuff them too full and they won't slide up and down the leader, then they won't spin on a real slow speed.
One of your videos I was watching, you said there that on those new ones that you want, or you should use a 3mm bead on the smaller ones and a 4mm bead on the next size up.
Yes, yes.
And that is because of the spin.
Yes. So, and I'll get more into that when we get into the lures, but 3mm beads and 4mm beads, those small beads are real important. The bigger the bead, the wider the spin will be on those cut plugs, and you start to lose not only the proper spin, but also the hook to catch ratio. You'll get bites and miss them. You want to keep that nice and tight around those hooks, and those smaller beads allow that. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So, what's your preference between cutplug herring versus going to the hardware and setting those? I mean, herring seems like to me it's kind of a hassle, especially if you're out on the boat cutting and trying to get baited back up and all that. Why not just stick with something, a hard bait like that, and juice it up once in a while? It seems like that'd just be a lot more simpler.
So what's the question is, where do I draw my line between the hard bait and the herring, and why not just the hard bait? Because it's easier, and I agree with you completely, and that's one of the reasons I spent a lot of time designing this particular hard bait, is because I wanted a bait that fished exactly like a herring, because there's stuff out there that doesn't have quite that tight spin at a real slow roll, at a real slow speed. And I'll tell you, over the last, I know these have only been out a year, but I've been prototyping them for a few years now. And over the last couple of years, well, this spring in particular, I haven't ran a cut plug herring yet. I've ran just these hard baits. And last year it was probably more 50-50 because I was still playing with these and things. But the hard baits fish really, really well. And I'm still brining up a couple herring so I can chop up and put inside them and give them that same smell. But with the hard baits, you're exactly right. It's easier. You're getting the same action out of them. There's some that are colored up to look just like a natural herring if you want. I like having some colors because they're going to stand out in that dirty water. You're going to catch those fish's attention a little faster. Yeah, I'm leaning more and more towards just running them. So I've been running in the lower river, I've been running the 3.0 size a lot. The water's a little dirty, it stands out, and the springers, when they're coming in, unlike a fall fish or even a summer Chinook, the springers still tend to want to feed. They tend to go on and off a bite. They're snappy. They'll try to feed on stuff all the way up the river. And we've just had a lot of smelt in the river, and smelt are pretty big. And you'll open up a 6-pound springer and it'll have 8 or 10 of those big smelt in it. And so I tend to run a little bit more of the bigger size in the spring down below, just because it's not only going to match kind of what they're chasing, but they're a little bit more willing to feed and be aggressive on it. Now, as I get up into some of these fisheries like the Wind River fishery and the Drano fishery, or some of the smaller fisheries where those fish are starting to stack up and get more stagnant and that feed isn't, then I tend to downsize, especially if the water's a little cleaner. It's not as an aggressive lure. So I'll change between the two, obviously, but right now, if I'm downhill trolling at Warrior Rock, I'm trolling the 3.0. I want those fish to see it. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Are you having bite stimulant to your stuff, or is that in your sense?
Good question. Do I add bite stimulants? And that's one of the questions I was hoping would come up. So when these fish just come into the river like they are right now, the water's still cold. The fish are super fresh and aggressive and still willing to feed. I tend to keep things really plain. Keep it just as my basic scents, whether it's my salmon scent or my sand shrimp or my tuna belly, gels on my lures, but keep it pretty simple. Don't overwhelm them. You want the good bait smell or a nice sweet smell. I talk about the anise in our salmon scent. Another sweet smell is vanilla. If you got a thing of vanilla in your kitchen, a drop or two in your herring or real light. These early fish like that vanilla smell when it's cold, just something sweet. But keep it pretty simple. Now, little bit later on, we get a couple more weeks down the road, and again, Wind River, Drano Lake, the Willamette up there by Oregon City, if they slow down the water later in the season, and those fish are kind of stacked up and they're stagnant in the channel maybe, that's where your bite stimulants come in. And you start running stuff like these Z salts that have some sodium sulfite and whatnot in it. The ProCure makes one that's called Monster Bite, can be really good. You want to go a little bit, don't overdo it, but a lot of times that'll get those fish to go once they're kind of here. They've been milling around for a week and they're not wanting to be snappy. That's where you start trickling in the bite stimulants. So, yeah. Other questions? How are we doing?
So I've got one more quick.
What's that?
I just missed kind of layout. Just want to know, did you show how to rig up those cut plugs yet?
Not yet. Haven't gotten to the cut plugs or lures yet. We talked about flashers and why we're running the different flashers, and we've just talking about bait. Yeah.
When temperature wise would you start trying the prawns and 360?
Good question. So when would I start running shrimp spinners or prawn spinners, which is on this board with blades, versus running herring, running anchovies, and running bait? Now, I got to step back a little bit on this because I was taught differently than what I'm going to tell you right now. So I was always taught that 50 degrees, when that water hits 50 degrees, that's when you start switching over and fishing more shrimp. I was always taught that. And I'm like, okay, that makes sense. You know, they want to feed on shrimp when the water starts warming up and you start trickling in shrimp and krill scent and that type of thing. Now, I've been keeping track of this for quite a while, but the last 5 years, I tend to see the first springer of the year caught usually in February sometime. And the first springer of the year is usually caught by a guy plunking a spin and glow and a coon shrimp fishing for steelhead. That water's 40 degrees, maybe 41. Well, that makes me think that the whole 50-degree thing, we just need to throw that out the window, because if they're going to be biting spin and glows and coon shrimp, guys fishing for steelhead back in February, we need to trickle those into our arsenal now. And so the last couple years, I have been trickling prawn spinners in right with fishing my herring or my cut plugs right at the start of the season, and I've been catching fish on them. So don't be afraid to run them right off the bat. And
Are you adjusting your mix, the sense of things that you're using on those coon shrimp?
so
Versus later in the year, maybe
so for the coon shrimp, as far as my mix goes, it's the same thought process. So early, when these fish are just showing up and they're fresh, I'm running them mostly right out of the jar with maybe a little bit of salmon scent on them, something sweet, something simple. And I'm running a cure that, like our Mag blend, doesn't have any sodium sulfite or anything in it. It's real plain and it's real more sugar forward. Simple, keep it simple. And then again, as a later on in the season, you start adding in, maybe you run a cure that has sodium sulfite in it, like our original, you start adding stuff to them to stimulate them. But it's the same thought process, and fish them just like you would a herring or anything else. But I am finding I'm catching fish early in the year running them just like I do a herring or a cut plug.
So on a hard outgoing, would you go to fish flash, put it on the bottom, and use a prawn spinner?
Absolutely.
Why not?
So, and also to step back in history. So I grew up years ago following guys like Bob Barthlow and different guides that developed prawn spinner fishing 30 years ago. So, and when they developed prawn spinner fishing, they didn't use any flashers. They used a lead ball, they used a number 4 Colorado or Cascade blade, and they used a prawn, and that's what they fished. And then fish flashes came in and changed the fishery, and now 360 flashers have come in and changed the fishery again. And so trolling them right behind the fish flash, very effective. Mm-hmm. Yep.
you're gonna cover later in the discussion?
Yep. So we're gonna get on to lures here in just a second. But yeah. Mm-hmm. Any other bait questions? Anybody want to know how to cure shrimp real quick since we're talking about bait? Yeah.
Back to the herring.
Mm-hmm.
Let's say you use 4 out of a dozen. Do you ever refreeze the brine herring, or is it?
The question, do I ever refreeze herring? Especially if you got a dozen, you only use 4 baits, and in the brine. No, and the reason is they get mushy, and you throw them back in the freezer, even if they're still in the brine. That refreeze process just makes them soft. They would be probably usable for stuffing inside a stuff bait, but they wouldn't be able to cut and be used as an actual cut plug again. Mm-hmm. So they're a little finicky that way. Especially anchovies. Anchovies are worse than herring. Their anchovies get soft real easy. But something to keep in mind, I know we talk about herring a ton, but if you go out to Astoria and beyond the mouth of Columbia right now, you're welcome. There's anchovies out there right now that these fish are feeding on. There probably isn't a herring within 100 miles. So don't be afraid to run anchovies. It trickled in with your herring presentation. A little more there's a little bit more of those available out there for these fish to feed on. So I run mostly cut plug herring. And the reason being is I like that tight, fast spin I can get at a really slow speed. And it takes a little bit more to get a whole herring to roll like that. And so when you're trolling downstream with these tides and trying to stay just ahead of the tide with those things on the bottom, that cut plug tends to work a little better, I find. When you get out fishing in the salt and different things, that whole bait can be really good. But
question about the anchovy. So you rig it with a helmet, or what do you do?
So an anchovy, do I rig it with a helmet? Yes. But one of the best videos you can go look is go on YouTube and type in rigging anchovies for the Rogue River. They have a couple ways they rig it down there on the Rogue, where they have a slider hook and things that make it spin really tight and without using a hood, and it's real effective. All right, curing shrimp real quick. So if you guys like to cure your own coon shrimp like I do, I like to know what's in my coon shrimp. Pretty simple. Buy a pound of frozen coon shrimp. I'm not sure if they have any here. I hope they do. But there's a few shops on up the river. I know Edge Pro Shops carry some. I think Bob's has them, but I'm pretty sure they have them here too. But following the directions on these. Take your shrimps. I like to sort mine a little bit and make sure that the ones with the heads falling off are out of there. So I know I'm curing good shrimp. But take a quart jar, put a half a cup or half a cup of your cure in there, and then you're going to do a third cup of rock salt, and then you're going to fill that jar as much as you can with your shrimp, and then you're going to take a liquid. I like the Slam & Sam's pink corn cure, or if I want to give it a little bit more red look, I use the orange corn cure. It's a product for kokanee fishing, but it has UV in it, has some dye in it. I use that as liquid in the jar. If the jar isn't quite all the way full of liquid after I've dumped one of those in there, then I top it off with just a little bit of distilled water. So shrimp cure, rock salt, shrimp, and then your liquid. Shake it all up. Now, what I find is shrimp take a while to cure. They take a while to bring on the salts and sugars and dyes that are in the cure. And so you want to put that jar in the fridge and flip it back and forth for at least 2 weeks. Let that stuff really cure. And once it gets cured all the way through really well, make sure after a couple weeks you still have a little bit of cure in the bottom of the jar and you still have some rock salt left in there. If you don't, add a little bit more. And the reason being is I find shrimp are different. I'll get batches of shrimp that doesn't take much of the cure, and I have a bunch left over in the jar. And then I'll get batches of shrimp that are just sponges, and I'll run the same amount of cure and it'll all be gone in a week and they'll soak it all in. And so you want to make sure you have some left over in the jar for longevity, because once that shrimp is cured right and good, it'll last years in your refrigerator. I've fished with jars of shrimp that are 2 years old. So that's kind of your curing process. But we do have detailed instructions on the cure jar, and just follow those. And there's YouTube videos too on our stuff. I think they have some here, but a few of the stores like Edge Pro Shops and different things on up the highway are starting to carry more and more just raw shrimp. You used to be able to get them right from D&G Bait also, but I think I've sent too many people over there because they've kind of cut people off. It said get them from the stores, so because they don't have a warehouse for a bunch of people to come and get stuff. But yeah. All right. Lures and baits. Should we move on to all this stuff? All right. Let's talk about the cut plugs. So, and I will hand a couple of these around for people to take a look at. Let's see here.
I noticed that one doesn't even have beads on it. That's got a tube on it.
Yeah, and actually has one bead.
It does have a bead.
Mm-hmm. And then I'll pull these two out. These are, one's rigged up one way and one's the other. All right, so I'm going to go over 3 different hook setups on these that I have sitting up here. Now, I'm finding with these cut plugs, I tend to like smaller hooks. Smaller hooks are really lightweight and they're super sharp, so they go into the fish really well and stay in there. Also with the smaller the hooks, the cut plug spins nice and tight and is nice and free, which tends to catch more fish. So on the 3.0s, I'm running 1/0 Big River hooks on the 3.0s. And that seems to hold up really well. On the 2.5s, I'm either running double number 4 trebles. But if you're in a fishery that's really dirty, the trebles tend to gather a lot of debris, then I'll go to number 1s, number 1 Big Rivers. Now, but you got to be careful when you bump down to a number 1 Big River from a 1/0. The number 1 is a little thinner wire, so you can't put as much pressure on a fish with a number 1. If you hook a big fish and put a lot of pressure on them, you will start to bend a number 1 a little bit. So you got to be careful with that. But the smaller hooks do really well. Rigging wise, I'm running all these on 30 pound. Honestly, I wouldn't go less than 30 pounds. I like even 40 pound on them. For the most part, the heavier leader isn't going to hurt these fish. We're in dirtier water. We're in a bigger river. They're not going to shy away from the heavier leader. And that heavier leader is going to give a nice stiff axis for that thing to spin. So I like a 30, and a 40 is even just fine. The biggest thing with that leader is making sure that that leader is nice and straight. That way that lure has a nice axis to spin on. If you start getting a leader that's kinked up, then the lure is not going to spin as well on it because it doesn't have that nice straight leader. So I like to rig what I'm going to fish with and have them on my rod overnight so that everything is nice and straight the next day. Or put it on a nice board like one of these fishing leader boards so that at least that 6-8 inches of leader right above your hooks is nice and straight on the leader board. And that way when you pull it off, that lure is going to sit nice and straight on the hooks. Leader lengths. So this varies depending on flasher you're fishing with and also clarity of water. If you got dirtier water, you're going to fish a shorter leader. If you got cleaner water, you're going to fish a longer leader. And that's if you're going to fish a fish flash. So I really like like right now in these conditions where the water's a little dirty, behind a fish flash, I really like about a 36 to 38 inch leader. The water starts to clean up a little bit. I'll bump it up to 42 to 44 or even 48 inches a leader in real clean water. What happens is if you're dragging the bottom real tight with that fish flash and you're going downstream at 2.5, 3 miles an hour, if the water's dirty and you're running a long leader, that fish is going to see that flasher. They're going to come right over and look at it. And then the water's dirty enough, they never see that lure and they veer away before that lure ever gets in their eyesight and they miss it. If the water's really clean and you're running too short of a leader, they're going to come over to that flasher, but because the water's so clean, they're not going to get as close to that flasher because it's a big object. They're going to go, oh, that's pretty big. And if that lure's too close to it, they're not going to want to go over and grab that lure because it's too close to that big object, because the water's clean and everything is very visible. It's going to be spooky to them. So you got to kind of find that happiness with the clarity of water and your flasher you're running. Now, when it comes to running the 360 flasher, there's another principle that comes in with that, and that is every time this thing rotates, it's going to create an action on that lure. It's creating that that cat and mouse situation. Every time it rotates, that lure speeds up and slows down. It speeds up and slows down. So they're going to come over and take a look at that flasher. It's going to rotate, and that lure looks like it's going to dart and take off, like it's going to get away, and they're going to snap at it. So now we're trying to find that happy place behind that flasher where it's, they're seeing the flasher and you're getting the right action on the lure. And what I tend to find is it's a little bit shorter than running behind a fish flash. It tends to be more in that 32 to 36 inch range, kind of just that little shorter than a fish flash, a little longer than I'd run a spinner, which I'll talk about in a minute. I know one of the thoughts that comes to my head when I talk about that, I'm like, well, that's a bigger flasher than the fish flash. How is the fish flash spooking them? And this one's not. And it's because you're creating that reflex of snapping at it. They may have gotten spooked from this, but since that lure looks like it's going to snap and get away, it triggers that, oh, I got to grab it before something else does. So they're willing to be more aggressive and go grab it and get closer to this thing than a fish flash.
So on your bumper and on your the leader length, what point to what point?
So leader length, I like to measure from the top of the lure to the swivel, and behind that flasher, this one looks to be about 33 inches. Yep, and the reason I personally don't measure from the back of the hook is because I'm not super consistent on tying this gap, and so your hooks may be further back or shorter, and so that full length isn't always going to be the same, where this from the top will be exact every time. And I'm a leader measuring junkie. You can ask my wife. I sit at night with a ruler on the table, and I measure leaders as I tie them and snip them, and I'll sit out on the water and I will look at 3 rods getting bit and 1 not getting bit, and I'll reel it in and chop off an inch and retie it, and I'm very big on leader length. Yeah, so that's one reason I try to only choose 2 bumper lengths, 18 and 24. You can do a 22, you can do a 20, you can do a 14, you can do a bunch of them, but every time you change this, it changes the snap on this. And there's too many variables. And so if I can narrow it down to 2 bumper lengths to where I only have to change this so many times, I can dial in the scenario a lot faster. And sometimes you got to find what works best on your boat. I'm going to drive my boat different than you drive yours, or he drives his, a little faster, a little slower. And sometimes 1 bumper length with 1 leader length might work a little better on your boat than it does mine or it does his, just because of your speed or how you're driving. And there is that scenario also, but it's usually within a couple of inches either way.
So you're looking for success, and you say you drive your boat differently and how it works versus mine. What does success look like there? Like, how are you determining, yeah, this is doing what I want it to do?
So I really pay attention obviously with these flashers, to what it's doing on my rod tip versus my speed over ground. And personally, I like a slower thump. I'm probably a little bit more of a, they talk about the 1 second thump. I'm probably a little slower than that on my boat. Actually, a lot of my friends give me a hard time that I'm in the way and I troll too slow. It's, I, they get on me all the time. Shane, speed up. And I'm like, well, this works good for me. And so I definitely have a little bit slower of a thump on mine. It's probably more like 1.2 to 1.5 seconds on mine. But that's just because I've dialed in this with this for how I'm trolling. If you ask Jared, who does this same seminar with me, and we do it as a team, he goes, I like 22-inch leaders, but he trolls faster than I do. And his rods are thumping a little bit faster. And he has really good success with that on his boat. Yeah. That's a lot to take in. There's like, okay, well, I can't rig it just like him and know I'm going to be perfect because it's, yeah, but I can get you close. I can get you really close. Yeah. All right. Hook setup. So we've got number 4 trebles. We can hand that around on a 2.5 with a piece of tubing. We got 1/0 on a 3/0 with tubing, and I'll hand that around. Yeah, you can get those from VIP on the micro tubing. You can also find it at Hobby Lobby. Hobby Lobby is great. You can also find micro tubing on Amazon. But you just got to kind of search around. Sometimes they call it a little different in different places. Yep. Yeah.
I take it you prefer not to use even the smaller bead, like the tube.
So this is my 3-hook setup, which works really well, and it has all beads. And this has been the other one. I like running this if I'm getting, sometimes when I'm running the tubing and all the hooks are back here behind the lure, I found there's some days I'm getting bit and they're not sticking, and it's because they're grabbing up here above the hooks and they're grabbing the bait itself. And it's not all the time, but it's sometimes. And so that's when I do like this 3-hook setup, where I do have one hook that's like right in the middle of the bait. I tend to miss a lot less fish that are grabbing up here at the top. And that has the number 4 beads on it, and it's a 3-hook setup. I'll hand that around. Questions on leaders and hooks on these things and swivels? So I like a bearing swivel, a 3. This, as you see, these have the 3 bead chain swivel type of deal. The fact that this lure is actually rotating on the leader and the whole leader itself isn't turning, you could probably get away with just a barrel swivel on it. But if it gets weeded up in any way, you may have a ball of a mess on the leader. So I do like that, at least some sort of 3 to 5 bead chain swivel. Yeah.
How long do you run your leaders? In terms of, do they wear out? Are you having the bait spinning around them, or they're shutting the leader?
So you do keep an eye on it. The way we've done the holes on this lure, I haven't had it affect that I've noticed, but it's not that it isn't possible. Say one of those holes get a little chip in it, or it gets clogged with debris and it's rubbing funny, rotating on there. It's worth keeping an eye on. More than anything, what I find is when you use a leader for a long time, the whole leader itself is a little more limp. And when it starts to get a little more limp over lots of use, it doesn't have the same snap behind this flasher as a new stiff leader. And so most of the time I'm changing out leaders because I just want to get back to a stiff brand new leader to have the proper action behind my flasher. It's not so much that the leader itself is wore out, if that makes sense.
You're using mono.
Yep, I'm using mono on there. That's just either a P line. I like the P line 30 or 40 pound, just the X Strong. Maxima Ultra Green's great too, but both of those fantastic. I do run some fluorocarbon on spinners because it's even stiffer, but usually not till later in the fall. I pretty much just stick with mono. It's cheaper. More questions on the Cutplug? I'm going to let those rotate for just a minute. I think I have 3 out there, so make sure I get all 3 of those back. Those are mine. No. So on the 3.0s, I use the 1/0, and then on the 2.5s, I use 1s. Yep. I am going to start covering prawn spinners next. Let's see here. I know I keep changing this even though we can hardly see it. Oh, look at that. And here's your prawn spinner. Good luck. Okay. So prawn spinners and blades. Now, a couple different things is I've got different blades up here. We've got, I'm a big Hildebrandt blade guy. I have been fishing with Hildebrandt blades for a lot of years, and they're a little bit more expensive of a blade, but they have a different shape to them than a normal Colorado blade. They have a little wider, round body to them. The Hildebrandt blade was designed by some guys back in the Great Depression, back in the 40s, and they were pretty smart dudes. They designed this thing to have a vibration and a flutter like a true bait fish, and it was for bass fishing. And the Hildebrandt blade has a unique vibration, and I tend to find it fishes better than a lot of stuff out there. And so I run, when I'm running my prawn spinners, I run the 3.5 and I run the 4. Now, if you look at a lot of normal blades out there, the Hildebrandt 3.5 is more like a number 3 in other blades, and the number 4 is more like a 3.5 in other blades. So these are the two I bounce back and forth between. I tend to run the 3.5s mostly when I'm running behind the 360. But if I start running the fish flash where I'm dragging bottom, I do like going to the bigger blade size and going to the number 4s. A little more flash, a little more vibration, a little more catch those fish attention when they're hugging the bottom tight and on the move. So I bounce back and forth between the two. Now, the other blade I run is a Cascade blade, the Mulkey blades. Now, the difference between the two is a Colorado blade, or the Hildebrandt blade, or the Colorado style, will spin tighter to the body. It's not going to flare out as much. And so it's going to catch fish's attention from the side and get them to come and snap at it and catch their attention from the side. Where a Cascade blade, this style, it likes to stand out from the body a little bit. So if you get into a fishery where you notice that fish are following you a lot. I don't know if any of you have seen that on your screens, or I can see it obviously really well on my live scope, where I get fish that are just following my spinner right behind it and they're not taking it. Well, a lot of times if you got a cascade blade on, it stands out and they can see it from the back a lot better. It has a bigger profile. And so you can get those fish followers to snap a little better by using a cascade blade instead of a Colorado blade. One's tighter, one sticks out a little more for, depending on what you got. Also, I find the little bit bigger profile cascade blade in real dirty water tends to catch a few more fish because it is a bigger profile down there than the Colorado blade. So I bounce back and forth between the two depending on what I'm seeing. But I'm a big Hildebrandt blade fan. That makes sense? Oh, makes sense? Perfect. All right, let's pull one of these off here. Let's pull this one off. Now, colors go just like what I talked about earlier, based on clean water, dirty water, dark mornings, sunny days. You're going to change your blade color based on these scenarios. And what I find, again, is solid colors, solid pink, solid green, solid chartreuse, white. Those type of colors really stand out on your darker morning. Also, what stands out on a darker morning or dirty water is gold. Gold stands out in those situations much better. Now, once you get the sun up or the water starts to clean up, then you want to switch to your metallics, your metallic greens, your nickel or silver, copper, stuff that's going to have more flash in it, and in nickel or silver in it, it's going to stand out much better on sunny days or cleaner water. Also, when the sun gets high, I find that your reds, your fluorescent reds, your fluorescent oranges also stand out in sunny versus pink and chartreuse. So there's a lot of times where I've switched over to reds and fluorescent oranges and copper or silvers in the afternoons during high sun and started hooking fish when my chartreuses and pinks and golds were not catching fish anymore. So, and that's just all based on how these fish are seeing it. They don't see color as in depth as we do, but they can see shades, and stuff stands out differently based on UV factor and sunlight. So you'll see that change, and that's what I find. Now I have, again, 30-pound leader. I just buy a big spool of 30 and I tie a lot of my stuff up on it. But 30-pound leader, for my prawn spinners, I like to run this number 4 treble as my trailer. And you'll see a rubber band on that. We'll go over that in a minute. A number 2 octopus hook. And then to space the blade a little bit from the shrimp, I've got 5mm beads, and I've got 5 of them there. And then I've got a little bearing bead at the top for my clevis. Now, on my clevis, I'll hand this around, but this is a spring clevis, and this is an interchangeable spring clevis that you can take the blade on and off. That's why some of these leaders don't have blades on them, and you can change them out. I find this metal spring clevis on here, you'll lose a lot less blades than the plastic interchangeable ones, and it still maintains a pretty fast rotation speed. Leader length. Now this is where we talked about before. A blade has more drag in the water. That blade is cupped, and so it's catching water to make it spin. And also the blade is metal, so it has some weight to it. So it's going to take a little more oomph to get this flasher to rotate to snap that blade, because it has more drag and it's catching more water. It's more weight on this flasher to make it rotate. So this is where we tend to run even shorter leaders. Where on the Cutplug, I may be running a 32 to 36 inch leader. When I drop down to these prawn spinners behind this flasher, I may drop it down to 30, 29, 28 inch leaders. so that I'm still getting that same snap that I'm getting on the cut plug and that same action that they want. It might just takes a little shorter leader because of the drag. That makes sense? Yeah.
You ever go to 24? A lot of guys fish 24 on those.
You know, so I've ran some 24-inch leaders in the fall and had some success on the fall fish on a regular 3.5 spinner. But on springers, I've never had success on a real short one, personally. I've seen some guys run them. Springers tend to be a little bit more lazy on what they want on that snap. Where the fall fish, and I think it has something to do with the real warm water in the fall fish seem to need a little bit more snap to it to get them to react, to get them to get that cat and mouse instinct, if that makes sense. That water's warm in the fall. It starts getting close to 70 degrees and losing oxygen. Sometimes it takes a little more to get those fish to react to it than right now, where it's starting to get to optimal temperature for these fish, where it has lots of oxygen. It's 48 degrees. It's starting to warm up for them. They don't need so much aggressive snap to get them to go.
Are you running those with your triangles also?
Yes. So when I switch over and start running the prawn spinners with the triangles, a lot of times what I like to do is I'll take the treble hook off the back and I'll run 2 singles. And the reason being is when I'm running the triangles, I'm hugging the bottom a lot more tightly with it. And the treble tends to get snagged a little bit more hugging the bottom, and it also tends to catch more debris like leaves and junk. And so I run 2 singles. I'll run a number 2 octopus or a 2-aught, and then I'll run a 1-aught as a trailer. And I'll put the shrimp on there. And then also what I like to do behind the triangles and hugging the bottom is I go to the bigger blade. I'll go to the number 4 Hildebrandt. It's going to catch their attention a little more. When those fish are hugging the bottom real tight and not wanting to move, sometimes you need a little bit more to get them to grab it. And so I'll go to the bigger blade, either the Cascade blade or the number 4, and then hug the bottom tight with it. And also, then I'll lengthen my leader back out just like I would with my herring or my cut plug, where I'm running that 36 to 42-inch leader, because I'm usually trolling pretty fast because of tide or current. I am, and actually I'm going to pull one more of these off here so that I can, because we're going to it's in the back of the pickup. My shrimp, I'm going to show them how to put shrimp on these things. Yeah, you want to run out there real quick? Need the keys? I brought bait. There you go. It's in the backpack. Yep. So she's going to run out and get the shrimp real quick, and we will actually put some shrimp on. But the rubber band, and I'll show you how to use it in a second, it's on the back of this, they're just an orthopedic rubber band. And again, you can order them off of Amazon. If you go to the dentist, a lot of times last time I was at the dentist, I'm like, hey, you got any like rubber bands for braces? And they're like, yeah. I'm like, can I get a couple packs? I'm like, you don't have braces? I'm like, I'm using them for fishing. So you can get them from your dentist a lot of times. This one's a 1/4 inch, 6.4 millimeter. You can get them smaller, but you start getting smaller. I mean, they're already kind of hard to work with. But the rubber band, pull it off here. What I do, and you'll see, is when we put on the shrimp, I'll take this rubber band, because they're nice and strong, and I'll take the hook in the shrimp and stick it through the rubber band and then close it so it holds the head of the shrimp on, and it holds that treble hook right off the nose of the shrimp. And what that's going to do is it's going to make your shrimp way more durable, for one, pulling behind that flasher, but also you're going to miss a lot less fish. because that hook's going to be right off the nose. It's not going to be flailing anywhere. And when that fish grabs onto it, he gets all hook. And there's no missing it. He grabs anywhere on that shrimp, he's got a treble hook or he's got a 2/0. So he's going to get hooked. And so I find the rubber band really helps with my hook to catch ratio, along with fishing the shrimp for long periods of time or dragging it through junk or getting weeds. If you're in a real weedy situation and you're cleaning weeds off all the time, it's not tearing your shrimp off. So the rubber band is real effective in that way. And as soon as I have those shrimp, she's on her way back here. I'm going to show you the 2 ways I put shrimp on the hooks. Any other questions on prawn spinners, blades, why I'm using the different blades? Hey, the magic bait box. Why, thank you. Oh, one more questions on that? All right. Spinfish versus Cutplug. So I find that spinfish really work well at faster speeds. And so fishing buoy 10 in a heavy tide or out in the ocean, or if you got a hard, maybe you want to, and I've done this many times too, where I've found a spot where the fish are funneling around and it's going out real hard, and I face myself upriver and just sit in one spot and things are working fast. Spinfish like speed, and if you're in a speed situation, they work really, really good. Little story about, I think it was 3 years ago. It was the last day that Columbia was open for springers. It was right about now. I actually had a bunch of the crew here from Fisherman's Marine on the boat, and we were fishing up by Multnomah Falls. There's a flat out there that can be really good for springers. And we had a heavy east wind that day. I threw them on the boat, and we got out there, and we weren't getting bit. And I threw on a couple spinfish, and the reason I did is the wind was blowing us downriver to where I had to run my kicker motor in reverse to try to slow down because it was blowing hard. Well, we were flying down the river about 3.5 miles an hour, and I was still running in reverse. And I threw on spinfish, and we started hooking fish. And it's because we were going fast. Those spinfish like speed. Now, the cut plugs gonna be more forgiving on the speed. It'll run fast, but you control them down a lot slower. They're gonna be real effective at your real slow putting along. They're still gonna rotate, and it's just a different action that's going to accommodate that slower speed. All right.
When I was walking out, you said our band's orthopedic.
Orthopedic, yeah, orthodontic, yeah. They put them on your back, right? On your shoulder?
Not bone.
On your shoulder? Yeah. That's why I drive a boat for a living. Got it. Oh. I could be a good doctor. You never know. All right, so shrimp. So this is shrimp that was done in my shrimp gears. I did shrimp this winter. I pulled these out, threw them in here the other day to fish with, and they smell good. It smells like salmon scent and sand shrimp scent on that one, and tuna scent on this one. So, I'm going to take my orthodontic rubber bands here. Yeah. So for the rubber bands, I take and I go right in the tail of the shrimp like so. And I'm going to hand this around. So it's going to sit just like that. And I'm going to take my rubber band and I'm going to open that rubber band up. And I'm going to stick the nose of the shrimp and the treble hook through the rubber band, which I know you can't see real well, but I will hand it around. and let it sit right on there. So that rubber band holds that treble hook right on the nose of the shrimp, just like that. And that's going to hold that shrimp perfectly straight with hooks everywhere. So, like that. I'll hand that around. The other way I like to run them is you don't need a rubber band. This just requires the egg loop knot. Now, the reason I do hook it another way is when I hook it straight with the rubber band, that shrimp pulls real straight in the water. It may flip around a little bit because of the rotation of the flasher, but it pulls real dead with just the spinner blade. This other way I'm hooking the shrimp, you can adjust the hooks a little bit and you can get the shrimp to spin a little bit. And sometimes I find, especially in calm water situations, stagnant fish, they want a little bit more action to the shrimp, and they like a shrimp that's rotating. The shrimp aren't quite as durable this way, but it can work real well. So we take the top of the hook, we start just behind the crown of the shrimp, so right here in the top of the tail, and we come out the top of the head like so. So it's sitting on there on the top of the head. Like I said, I'll hand this around. And then from here, we're going to take the egg loop on the hook, open up the tail just a little bit, and we're going to stick the egg loop around that tail and cinch it down. Make sure you don't cut it. And that's going to hold. See how the shrimp's kind of at an angle like this instead of perfectly straight? That's going to allow the shrimp to catch water and flip around and twirl a little bit more. The hooks still hold fairly good right off the nose. All the beads stay above and rotate, but that's also a really good way to hook your shrimp. Any questions on that? He'll come around here. And I noticed Fisherman's Marine had them over here is all the new colors of Hildebrandts and Mulkeys. There's gold and chartreuse, blue dot. I think that nuclear green and pink one that's coming around, the nuclear Mexican hat. They have all these new colors over there, so it's good to see. There's some of my favorites. When do we use gel scent versus oil scent? When you forgot one or the other. Yeah, exactly. So quick, gels versus oils, real quick. So I really like using oil scents when I'm using bait. When I'm using shrimp, when I'm using tuna, when I'm using herring, anchovies. When I'm mixing bait up, bait will accept an oil scent. It's natural. It'll actually suck it in. And then as the bait fishes, it'll leach it out naturally, like a natural bait oil scent, like it's supposed to do. Where I really like our gels, if we're going to run a gel scent, is when I start running hard baits, when I start running plugs, I start running these cut plugs. What you can do with that gel is you can stick it down on the bottom or wipe a little on the side, or if you're running a plug that's not wrapped, like a 3.5 mag lip, you can put the gel on the top. If you're running a spinner, you can put the gel on the beads. Anything that can't soak an oil scent in, that's where the gel shines, because the gel is going to stick to it and give it that smell and leach it off. So hard baits, plugs, beads, you can add the gel to and be real effective. your baits, such as your herring, your shrimp, your tuna, you put the oil scent in to soak it in, give it that natural scent. Spoons, if you're out fishing the ocean, you're fishing spoons behind those flashers, a little gel scent on there. Mm-hmm. So for the cut plugs, so on the cut plugs, I use my wash down hose. So I'll take and for the most part, what I do is I'll take a little tub of soapy water, and if you take your wash down hose on these holes and squirt it right in those holes, it shoots all the bait out real easily. And then if it's really gummed up with gel, a little soapy water, usually get it all cleaned out. I know our Juju gels here, they clean up pretty well with just some lemon fresh joy and some soapy water. You should be able to get those cleaned up without having too much gunked up on there. Mm-hmm.
So just a side question, hard baits versus the herring, watching your rod go off, since it's a hard bait, would you grab it faster, or do you let it do the down, munch, wait till it's feeling line back?
So the bite, hard baits versus true herring, do you grab it right away or do you let them eat it? With salmon, doesn't matter what I have on, let them eat it. I am a big, I always say on my boat, the slow guy wins. The guy that I am trolling along and he's eating a sandwich and petting the dog and I have to tell him he has a fish on, that's the guy that lands his fish every single time. The guy that's intent on his rod and grabs it right away, it's a very, he may or may not land it. And it doesn't matter what we're pulling, whether it's a shrimp spinner, a herring, a plug, a new cut plug, a spin fish. I wait till that thing's on there. I always let them hook themselves. Yeah. What you got with this stuff, whether it's, I don't lift up tight and reel down on them. So what you find, whether it's this flasher or a fish flash and these rods, they're pulling against 50-pound braid that doesn't stretch, or 65. They're pulling against a 6 to 16 ounce lead, depending on what you're fishing and where you're at. A flasher, and it's in a rod holder, and then you got your drag set, not too tight, but stiff, and they start to take out a little bit of line on that. If your hooks are sharp, they're not going to set it any better than that. If you're trolling 1.5 miles to 3 miles an hour the opposite direction and they grab it and go the other way against all that and pull a little bit of line, they're hooked about as good as hooked as they're going to get. And then lift up and reel down tight. Yeah.
Jake said, 1 for 7 on quicks today. What can I do to increase the hookup to land?
Jake went 1 for 7 on quicks today. That's a good bite. What I find when running plugs, whether it's quicks or mag lips or M2 flatfish or any of that stuff, if you're running the original double trebles and you're missing a lot of fish, I will go to a Siwash, like a Big River Siwash off the trailer hook that's on a barrel swivel, and then run the treble off the belly. Sometimes when these fish get moving real fast, that Big River Siwash that's hanging back there a little bit off the trailer hook can be a better hookup, where they get that in the corner and then they pin the treble underneath their jaw and you tend to land a lot more fish. Also, really leave it in the holder like I was just talking about, and let it fold over with the fish on it for a long period of time before you grab the rod. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. 1 for 7. That's a good bite. Can I get on your boat? Yeah. What are you wrapping your plugs with? No, no. You're very welcome. And that is one of those things, especially right now, these fish are moving fast. You can miss a lot of fish. And I've ran multiple different hook setups on the plugs and missed fish on all of them. It just when they get moving fast, you can miss them. Mm-hmm. Any other questions? I'm starting to run out of stuff to talk about here. Do I have any more stuff on here? Oh, there's the blades, which you can't really see, and spinfish. There's my secret shrimp brine, which you can't really see. Moving on. No, that's about all I got for you guys. Any other questions? Yeah.
Just in general, so let's say a guy that's not super experienced running a boat by himself. So you're out there and you're fishing right now, and you want to land a springer in the Willamette or the Columbia, doesn't matter. What would be your simple, basic go-to tactic right now? What would you go out with, and what weight and what depth and
I would
what tide and what would you do to just go out in the morning? Let's say between now and in this next week, with the weather going to be decent, what would your strategy be, and what would you use?
What would be my strategy, and what would I use if I were to go catch a fish right now? The first thing I would look at is my tide, and I would pick a tide. I would pick either a high change or a low change. I like tide changes. The fish tend to get active during tide changes, and the reason being is on a high tide change, they're kind of milling around, in feeding, and then all of a sudden they get water in their face and it turns them on and they're going upriver because that tide changes and starts going out. And so it creates a bite. Same thing happens on the other end where they got all this water in their face and then all of a sudden the water stops and they come up off the bottom and they're trying to figure out what's going on and they go on a bite. Not that you can't get them to bite in between, but those are generally good bite times, is high tide, low tide. So I like to pick about 4 hours around a tide change, usually hour and a half, 2 hours before to 2 hours after. And those are going to be your premium 4 hours. And then I do just what I did here. I'd bring 2 rods. During slack tide or incoming, I would probably fish a 360 and have either a cut plug behind it or a prawn spinner behind it. And then when that tide changed and started going out, if that's where you're at, then I'd switch over to the fish flash, hug the bottom, and fish a cut plug or a bigger prawn spinner. Yep. Yeah, those tide changes are always the best 4 hours, and you can get them otherwise, but those are usually the best 4 hours.
That's like behind the 360. You want to run them a little longer in your spinners, right?
Yeah, usually 32 to 36 inches, where my prawn spinners I'm running 28 to 32.
When you're running 6 rods and you're running either a fish flash or a skateboard, do you assign each seat at the beginning of the day a color tryout and then rotate through that as the day progresses?
Kinda. So I have a color scheme in my head based on morning versus midday. And so I will start with a selection of usually golds and solid colors first thing in the morning. And then as it gets brighter, if it's going to be a sunny day, I'll start switching out some of those colors, but I have, you know, six colors in 6 colors usually, and those are kind of what I start changing out. And then I let the fish tell me. I mean, I get on there and some days, there's days where the nuclear green with the pink fires all day long, and then I've started with one, and at the end of the day I got 4 on. I mean, it's just kind of, you got to let the fish tell me a little bit, and it's like, you know, my what I have for an idea and what they do sometimes, there's 2 different things. You know, I hope my scheme always works, but sometimes they have a different plan. And assigning a seat, the other part with that is I could run all 6 rods with the same color, and for some reason that middle seat on my kicker side is the rod, and it just keeps getting bit even though all the other rods are the same.
Why is that?
I don't know. If we can figure that out, that's the $1 million question.
We have identical poles, identical setups.
Mm-hmm.
I color tape my rod just so I could make sure that we could
Uh-huh.
She hammered the fish, and I'd sit there sucking my thumb.
Mm-hmm. And the other one that if we could figure out is women and children. You stick a lady or a child by a rod, that rod's going to catch the first fish, it's going to catch the biggest fish, it's going to catch the most fish, and it doesn't matter what you put on that rod.
I just started bowing.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh. That's just how it works. Yep. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So you
I
take
like
2
it when
rods out. You take 2 rods out, you're going to fish a shorter, noodlier rod for your pro troll versus maybe a 10-6, a little bit stiffer for your fish flash.
No, they're the same rods. I tend to fish this. I gear my rods for fishing 360 flashers because I have to fish more lead with those, and then I fish flash with them, if that makes sense. So I gear my setup to be able to handle 360 flashers and heavier leads, because I only have to fish a 4, 5, or 6 ounce lead with a fish flash because it has no drag. Or with a 360 flasher, I tend to have to fish 10, 12, 16 ounce leads because they have more drag. Mm-hmm.
Another question.
Yeah.
On your tuna,
Mm-hmm.
do you go for a premium brand in the can, or because I bought some really cheap stuff, and I opened it up and it don't even smell good fresh out of the can.
Bumblebee works. I like Bumblebee. There's a yeah. Mm-hmm. There's no mermaid on this one. Did I miss something?
So I bought some cheaper stuff, and it doesn't even smell good when you open it up.
Yeah. So there's another brand of tuna. What's that other one I get? Dolores. It's a Mexican brand of tuna. It's a gold can. That stuff works really good too sometimes. It's a little more expensive, but it has a nice smell to it. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I bought some stuff. I mean, I wouldn't even feed it to the cat.
The Dolores with the garlic and the vegetables in it, though, that one doesn't work good. Yeah, no vegetables. For some reason, they don't like carrots and peas.
You tend to run 50 pounds with like 30-pound leaders. Is that kind of how you approach?
I do, yep. In the fall, I will bump up to a lot of 40-pound leaders on some of those bigger fall fish and heavier tides.
You bump up to 65 with that 40, or you just run 50?
I run 50 all the time. What you do find with 50 is I